would you do if someone you loved simply vanished without a trace? A young woman, 4 months pregnant, disappears from her apartment in broad daylight, leaving behind only confusion, questions, and a trail of lies. It's a nightmare no one expects to face, yet for Amber Wilde's family, this became their painful reality. Amber Lynn Wilde, a 19-year-old student at the University of Wisconsin, was on the verge of a new chapter in her life. She was bright, ambitious, and just beginning to carve out a future for herself. But on the night of September 23, 1998, Amber disappeared from her apartment in Green Bay, Wisconsin, leaving behind only a few signs that anything was wrong. No one heard from her after that final phone call to her father. Her car was found abandoned, her personal items left behind, and the investigation that followed raised even more questions than answers. Amber's story isn't just one of a missing person. It's a tale of unanswered calls, suspicious relationships, and a future that was never realized. At the time of her disappearance, Amber was 4.5 months pregnant, and the father of her child, Matthew Schneider, was nowhere to be found. This would quickly become a case wrapped in mystery and doubt, one that's never truly been solved. For over a decade, Amber's family, friends, and the community have been waiting for answers. Who could have been behind her disappearance? Was it the man who claimed he barely knew her? Or was something more sinister at play? With every passing year, the hope for closure fades, but the questions never cease. Amber Wilde's story remains unsolved, and the search for the truth continues to this day. In this documentary, we'll follow Amber's life leading up to her disappearance, dive into the investigation that has yet to provide any concrete answers, and uncover the mysteries that still surround her case. The tragedy of her disappearance has haunted those closest to her for years, and the question remains, will we ever find out what truly happened to Amber Wilde? Amber Wilde was just 19 years old when she disappeared from her apartment in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But her story didn't begin in the city. She grew up in the small town of Campbellsport, Wisconsin, a place where everyone knows each other and life moves a little slower. Amber's childhood, however, was anything but slow. She was bright, ambitious, and determined to make something of herself from a young age. As a high school student, Amber stood out, not just for her intelligence, but for her drive. She wasn't the type of person to settle for just getting by. Amber had dreams, big ones. She aspired to become a pediatrician, a goal that might have seemed far-fetched to some, but not to her. Amber wasn't just smart, she was dedicated. She threw herself into her studies and excelled. Even before graduation, she took college classes at the University of Wisconsin, setting the stage for her future. By the time Amber graduated from Campbellsport High School in 1997, she had already earned a full scholarship for her studies. She was on her way. Instead of following the typical 2-year path to finish an associate's degree, Amber completed it in 1 year, showing just how determined she was to move ahead in life. Her family was incredibly proud of her. Amber wasn't just a student with big dreams. She was a young woman who worked tirelessly to make those dreams a reality. After finishing her associate's degree, Amber transferred to the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay. There, she lived in an apartment, just beginning what was supposed to be the next chapter in her life. She had plans to continue her education, working toward becoming a pediatrician. The future seemed bright. She was 4 months pregnant with a baby, a fact that, despite the challenges it brought, didn't seem to derail her focus. Amber had family support, and they were excited about the new addition to their family. They were ready to help her with the baby when the time came, ensuring she could continue with her education. But, as with many dreams, Amber's was interrupted. Not by her own choice, but by something far more sinister. The young woman who had dedicated herself so intensely to her future was about to face a fate that no one could have predicted. And what happened next would leave everyone around her searching for answers. How could someone so full of promise, someone with so much ahead of her, simply vanish from her apartment without a trace? The mystery surrounding Amber Wilde's disappearance would grow deeper with every passing day. and the questions would remain unanswered for years to come. September 23, 1998 started like any other day for Amber Wilde. She had no way of knowing that this seemingly ordinary day would be the last time anyone would hear from her. Earlier that day, Amber had been involved in a minor car accident near her apartment at the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay. It wasn't a serious crash. She had rear-ended another car, but the impact left her with a headache and she felt shaken up. Amber called her father, Steve Wilde, to let him know about the accident. It wasn't uncommon for Amber to check in with her dad, so the phone call itself didn't raise any immediate alarms. She explained the accident and mentioned that she had gone to the university's medical staff, where she was told she might have a concussion. The doctors advised her that someone should check on her, just to make sure everything was okay. Her father was concerned, of course, but Amber assured him that she was fine, that she was just going to rest for a while. There wasn't anything particularly unusual about the conversation, nothing that would have made Steve think his daughter was in any immediate danger. But it would be the last conversation he would ever have with her. Later that night, Amber's father tried to call her again. It wasn't unusual for her to be busy, so he didn't think much of it when she didn't answer immediately. But as the evening wore on, and he continued to reach out without any response, Steve's concern began to grow. Amber had always been reliable. She would return calls, keep in touch. It wasn't like her to go silent, especially after something as unsettling as a car accident. The following morning, the worry turned to fear. Amber didn't show up to her 1 p.m. class, which was highly uncharacteristic of her. She was a dedicated student, and missing class wasn't something she did. She also missed a scheduled optometrist appointment. Another red flag. Steve called Amber again, but there was still no answer. With growing dread, he drove to her apartment. When he arrived, her car was gone. There was no sign of Amber. Her apartment, though, was untouched. Nothing appeared out of place. At this point, there was no doubt in Steve's mind that something was terribly wrong. Amber had never disappeared like this before. After searching her apartment and calling her friends and acquaintances, Steve contacted the police. The investigation would reveal few answers in the beginning. The police would later learn that Amber's car had been found abandoned near Lambeau Field, with her purse, cell phone, and keys left inside, left behind in an unlocked vehicle. The police began their search, but without a body and without any solid evidence pointing to a suspect, they were left with more questions than answers. And just like that, Amber Wilde's life became a mystery. One that would haunt her family and friends for years to come. The strange details of that day, the accident, the unanswered calls, the sudden silence, added to the growing sense of unease. What happened to Amber Wilde? Was her disappearance an unfortunate accident, or was it something far darker? The questions were just beginning, and the search for answers would prove to be more elusive than anyone could have imagined. As the days turned into weeks, the search for Amber Wilde continued, but the leads were few and the mystery deepened. The police were left with few clues to work with, but what they did find began to paint a disturbing picture. The first step in the investigation was to interview those closest to Amber. Among them was Matthew Schneider, the man Amber had confided in about her pregnancy. He had been involved with Amber, but the details surrounding their relationship were murky. Despite Amber's claims and her diary entries indicating that Matthew was the father of her unborn child, Matthew insisted to the police that he barely knew Amber. When questioned, Matthew's story seemed implausible. He told authorities that he had met Amber once at a restaurant and exchanged a few words, but their connection, he said, was minimal. "I barely know her," he claimed. "I never had sex with her." But his phone records told a very different story. The police uncovered nearly 60 phone calls between Matthew and Amber, calls that spanned from when they first met to the time of her disappearance. Matthew's insistence on his innocence seemed more like a cover-up than a simple denial. He refused to cooperate fully with the investigation, and by October 1998, he had stopped answering questions from the police altogether. His behavior was becoming more and more suspicious. But what could they prove? Then came the discovery of Amber's car, abandoned near Lambeau Field, just days after she had gone missing. Her purse, cell phone, and keys were still inside. Everything left in an unlocked vehicle. The car had been parked in a public lot, but no one had seen Amber or anyone else with her. It raised even more questions. Who parked the car there? Why was it left unlocked with all her personal belongings inside? Was it possible that Amber had been forced into something? Her car left behind as a sign that she had been taken. But it wasn't just the car that raised suspicions. Amber's relationship with Matthew had more layers than anyone had initially realized. It turned out that Matthew was engaged to another woman, Heidi. And while Heidi seemed to dismiss the situation, claiming that Amber was just making things up, there was more going on behind the scenes. Matthew's fiancée Heidi knew about Amber, but her dismissive attitude suggested that something more was happening beneath the surface. She believed Amber's accusations were just lies, blaming Amber for causing trouble. However, the phone records painted a much different picture, showing a deep connection between Matthew and Amber. Heidi's position seemed more like an attempt to protect Matthew than to seek the truth. The mounting evidence of Matthew's involvement, combined with his refusal to cooperate, raised serious doubts about his role in Amber's disappearance. His lies seemed to be unraveling, and the more the police dug, the more questions they had. Was Matthew Schneider hiding something? Was he, in fact, the key to solving this mystery? Or was there someone else who had played a role? The investigation was now at a crossroads. With no body and no clear answers, Amber's case became a chilling enigma. Matthew was a person of interest, but the police didn't have enough concrete evidence to arrest him, and so, the mystery of Amber Wilde's disappearance remained unresolved, leaving her family with a growing sense of dread and a nagging feeling that someone knew more than they were letting on. With each passing day, the questions only grew. Was Matthew Schneider involved in Amber's disappearance? Or was there a far darker truth lurking just out of reach? The investigation had only begun to scratch the surface, but one thing was clear. The answers they were looking for seemed to be trapped in a web of lies and half-truths, and the truth was becoming more elusive by the minute. As the years passed and Amber Wilde's disappearance remained unsolved, the case seemed to take on a life of its own in the public eye. The mystery surrounding the young woman, her pregnancy, and the strange circumstances of her vanishing captivated not just her family but the entire community and beyond. Despite the intense searches, both official and voluntary, the answers remained just out of reach. Amber's case was thrust into the spotlight, but every lead seemed to fade into nothing. The police organized multiple search parties, combing through forests, fields, and waterways, hoping to find any trace of Amber. Yet, no significant evidence was ever discovered. Her car had been found, but where was she? What happened after that? The deeper the investigation went, the more questions arose, and the fewer answers came forward. As months turned into years, the failure to find Amber or any solid clues only fueled speculation. The public's interest grew, and with it, the many theories about what might have happened. Some believed that Amber's disappearance was tied to her relationship with Matthew Schneider, the man whose name seemed to keep resurfacing. Was he involved? Did something sinister happen between the two? Matthew's strange behavior and refusal to cooperate with the police made him a central figure in the investigation, yet no one could definitively prove his role. Others speculated that there could be more to the story than what was visible on the surface. Amber was pregnant, a detail that added a layer of complexity to the mystery. Was her pregnancy a factor in her disappearance? Could someone have taken her because of her pregnancy? Whether out of malice, jealousy, or something even darker? Theories swirled around her relationships, with questions about whether anyone else in Amber's life had a motive to harm her. The mystery of Amber's pregnancy also became a point of tension. Who was the father? Had she truly been involved with Matthew, or was there more going on that people weren't aware of? In a case already filled with so many unknowns, the lack of clarity about Amber's relationship with her family and friends only made the story more confusing. Was Amber's pregnancy the key to unlocking the truth, or just another unanswered part of the puzzle? Another new event. It was the gaps in the case, the unanswered questions and the dead ends that kept people talking. The sense of unfinished business hung in the air. How could Amber simply vanish without a trace? Why was there no clear evidence of what happened? And where was she? These questions were at the forefront of the public's mind, and as time went on, they only seemed to grow more urgent. The case of Amber Wilde is a reminder of how mysteries linger, fueled by unanswered questions and the sense of justice that so often gets left behind. Theories about Matthew's involvement, the oddities of her pregnancy, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance continue to haunt those who knew her and those who came to know her story. With each passing year, the mystery only deepens, leaving us to wonder, will the truth ever come to light? Despite years of investigation, Amber Wilde's case remains unsolved, a tragic reminder of how some mysteries never fully fade. The investigation into her disappearance has evolved, but it has also stalled in ways that leave many questions unanswered. In the years following Amber's disappearance, there were moments of hope, small breakthroughs that seemed to push the case forward. From 2015 to 2017, new efforts were made to uncover what really happened that day. Authorities started looking at the case with fresh eyes, bringing in experts who could examine the details more closely. One of the key developments during this period was the FBI's involvement. They didn't just investigate, they brought in the Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, a team known for its expertise in criminal profiling. And the hope was that the BAU could uncover something previously missed, a pattern, a clue, anything that could shed light on Amber's fate. One of the most significant actions taken was the subpoena of Matthew Schneider's phone records. Matthew had long been considered a central figure in Amber's case, and authorities were desperate for answers. Could his phone records reveal anything that would connect him to Amber's disappearance, or even give insight into his behavior leading up to her vanishing? The records were carefully scrutinized, but even with this new line of inquiry, the results were, once again, inconclusive. The records didn't provide enough to say definitively what had happened. As the years passed, the public's interest in the case didn't wane. The mystery of Amber's disappearance continued to fuel speculation. People wanted answers. They wanted to know what happened to the young woman who had seemingly disappeared without a trace, her life full of potential, now lost to her family and friends. With no new concrete evidence, the investigation began to feel like a never-ending cycle of dead ends. Even as some remained hopeful that a breakthrough might be just around the corner. The hope that Amber's case might be solved isn't completely gone. The investigation is still technically open and law enforcement continues to examine the case. But despite all the efforts, there's still no resolution, no closure, no answers. As much as it seemed like there had been progress, the reality is that the case remains a haunting mystery. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit may have reviewed the evidence, but what did they truly uncover? Was there a pattern to be found, or was Amber's disappearance simply a dark chapter with no clear ending? With each passing year, the case feels like it drifts further into uncertainty. The family still waits, the public still wonders, but the truth of what happened to Amber Wilde remains elusive, just beyond reach. And so, the case lingers, open, unsolved, and filled with unanswered questions. Where is Amber? What happened to her? Until those questions are answered, the case will never truly close. The search for Amber Wilde continues, but with every unanswered question, the need for closure grows heavier. It's a pain that her family has carried for years, waiting, hoping, and questioning. Amber's story, once filled with potential and promise, has been overshadowed by a mystery that still haunts the lives of those who loved her. Amber's disappearance remains one of those cases that seems to slip through the cracks of time, unresolved and haunting. Despite numerous investigations, expert reviews, and public interest, The truth about what happened that day remains elusive. There are so many unanswered questions about Matthew Schneider's involvement, the strange phone records, and the moments that led up to Amber vanishing. Yet, the answers remain hidden, buried under layers of confusion, speculation, and doubt. For Amber's family, the weight of not knowing is unbearable. The emotional toll of having no closure is something they live with every day. They deserve justice, not just for Amber, but for the truth to be uncovered and for the pain to finally be acknowledged. The mystery surrounding Amber's disappearance is not just an abstract case. It's the story of a young woman, a daughter and a sister, whose life was taken too soon. Her family, despite the years that have passed, still holds on to the hope that they will one day find the answers they deserve. And while the investigation still remains open, we are left to wonder, what more can be done? The clock is ticking, and with each year that passes, the sense of urgency grows. Someone knows something. Someone has the missing piece to this puzzle. Maybe, just maybe, that person is watching right now. Amber Wilde's story is far from over. Her family deserves justice, and perhaps, just perhaps, you hold the key to solving this case. With the right piece of information, a memory, or a confession, the truth could finally come to light. But until then, the search goes on, a reminder that sometimes the darkest mysteries can remain unsolved until they're not.